Quick case study on something I thought was pretty cool involving a hybrid between two of our common duck species, Mallard and northern Pintail. When these two species hybridize, there tends to be a fairly common, sort of expected look when the males mature. You get this sort of chestnut chest, intermediate sort of head color, that blue bill, the distinct black stripe, bit of a curled tail, kind of halfway between the two. I think it's kind of neat that, despite what a lot of people would say of how you don't really know with hybrid birds what they are, or, we don't really know how often they tend to look the way you expect them to look, like this familiar pattern. It happens pretty often. And just based on how often they tend to look like this, I like to assume that this is what a hybrid would look like when, a male and a female of each species, each peer species comes together and produces offspring. You get this intermediate look. And so you could apply that theoretical presumed label of this is a first generation hybrid. Sort of an interesting question was posed recently on the Great Lakes Bird Study Group Discord about, what is this bird? Is this an aberrant mallard with a bit of a blue bill and sort of a weak tail curl? Or, could this bird be a mallard pintail cross? Just, maybe one that's much more on the mallard side of things. And again, you can't say for sure, but it is sort of interesting to consider if this output could be caused by one of those hybrids crossing back with a mallard. As part of that discussion, this bird was posted in the forum, just sort of saying how this seems to be another hybrid that's presumably much more on that mallard side. You can kind of see the bill structure is a bit more pintail-like, where it's thin, the tail isn't curled quite like a mallard, and there has actually been one of those apparent first-generation hybrids living in Guelph for a number of years. You could almost make the leap that this is one of the offspring of that hybrid crossed back with a mallard. Through that sort of sharing of interesting examples of birds and discussion, my mind actually wandered back to this bird that Owen Strickland photographed in Toronto a couple months ago. Brought up as is this an aberrant mallard? The bill color's a bit off. Maybe the tail curl isn't quite there. Maybe it's a bit messy, a bit darker. But sort of at face value, without that context and without thinking about hybridization, it might be pretty easy to assume, which it could be the correct assumption, that this is just an aberrant, unusual-looking male mallard. But definitely brought me back questioning again: is that bird, this one on the left here, have some sort of historical pintail influence to it? Hard to say for sure. I just thought it was a really cool example to think of. Just for added interest's sake, this bird that I had way back in 2003, I've always sort of assumed is what would happen if you had one of these hybrids, the first generation mallard northern pintail hybrid crossed back with a northern pintail, so sort of in the other direction. Again, no real way to say for sure, but it's just so much like a northern pintail, where only this small area on the back of the head was green under neutral light, but did sort of have a green iridescence over the whole head when the light hit it at just the right angle. But yeah, just sort of thought having all these birds together was a sort of cool case study to highlight how, with hybrid birds, there is sort of this standard search image that we might expect, that like sort of first generation hybrid, which a number of individuals match. But when you are talking about hybrids, whether we know their genetic history or not, it is possible to get sort of a spectrum from one species to the other, presumably depending on different factors, including how far back the mixing happened within their lineage. So just kind of something cool to keep in mind. If you're out in the field, if you see anything cool, document it, share it, and you never know how we can connect the dots in the future. It helps us learn more about cool birds.